This week, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker is on the record. We go one-on-one to talk immigration and the assault weapons ban. Missouri Democrats rally behind an amendment to legalize abortion. Donald Trump dominates Iowa. Political science expert Anita Mannion is here with analysis for the record. It's all coming up right now. Welcome to The Record. I'm Mark Maxwell. By the time Iowa Republicans walked out of their caucus sites Monday night, Donald Trump had claimed a decisive victory, and Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley had set their sights on rebounding in New Hampshire and South Carolina. But on their way into those caucus sites, we learned a little bit more about what voters want. GOP voters anyways. An entrance poll conducted by NBC News found immigration was the top issue, with the economy a close second. That tracks closely with what we heard from Iowa Republicans in Lee County's Keokuk caucus site.
The border is a big thing with me.
It's really gone the wrong way the last 3 years, and we're just really looking to make another turnaround and to get our country back to where it's safe and not wealthy, but at least more financially secure and our borders secure. I mean, that's what I'm looking for in a candidate.
The border again. I mean, people coming in here that's Americans taxes are paying for people to live that's coming across the border.
Republicans are not alone in warning about the volume of migrants crossing the southern border. On this very program last week, Illinois Senator Dick Durbin said the high volume is, quote, bankrupting our system. Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker has also recognized the cost factor in recent statements and budget addresses, calling on Texas Governor Greg Abbott to stop sending busloads of asylum seekers to Chicago during the frigid cold. We sat down with Pritzker during a stop at an elementary school in Belleville Wednesday. You've drawn some national headlines recently over this immigration issue. In your letter to Texas Governor Greg Abbott, you said the Biden administration could do more to secure the border. What specifically?
Well, they're at the table now, Biden and Congress, the Republicans in Congress, to try to negotiate something that will work at the border. I'm not an expert in border security. I do believe, though, comprehensive immigration reform is required here.
But you identified something more they could do. What is that?
Well, I'm telling you that first of all, let's start with the system as it is now isn't working well. And so we know that there's more that could be done to change the law. One of the reasons the Biden administration is in the situation that it is because the laws that were left to them when they took over didn't allow them to do more than what they're doing now with regard to asylum seekers. That's why we need Republicans and Democrats to come together to solve this problem.
It's interesting to watch some of the rhetoric shift in D.C. Senator Durbin told us just last week that there are international groups with sinister intent, he said, that are recruiting people, maybe, giving them certain information about how to come here, and people from Europe and Asia are ending up at the southern border. He raised that concern. Illinois does offer significant benefits to undocumented migrants who come here, health insurance being one of them. That was a bill you signed into law 2 years ago. Would you sign that bill into law today?
Well, let's back up a moment. The challenge that's occurring at the border right now is a challenge having to do with asylum seekers, very different than undocumented immigrants.
In some
very
cases.
Different. The asylum seekers coming across the border who are being bused by the governor of Texas to Illinois is a wholly different category of folks. They're here in this country legally. And they're being used as political pawns by Republicans at border states. So we have to solve for that problem. That's an immediate issue. We have to solve for the issue of undocumented immigrants who are here in the United States and have been here for decades, and asking the question, shouldn't we offer them a path to citizenship?
You make a distinction between an undocumented migrant who crosses the border and an asylum seeker, I would imagine.
Correct. There is a big difference. One is, in fact, here legally under the laws of the United States.
Sure, but not everybody that crosses the southern border is an asylum seeker. Some folks might see it as an inducement almost, or an encouragement not to follow the law if they can come to Illinois and get health insurance. Some critics have suggested that.
Well, it's ludicrous. We're talking about the vast majority of undocumented immigrants in the state of Illinois have been here for many years, and they are taxing our healthcare system. Why? Because they can't see a doctor, because they're undocumented. And so they end up getting very, very ill and then going to our emergency rooms where we are required by law to treat them. It costs vastly more to do that than it does to provide them just basic physician care, allowing them to have regular checkups.
I remember you being quite upset after the mass shooting at Highland Park and calling for the assault weapons ban that you passed there. You highlighted advocates, the work of Mothers Demand Action and others, but now the law is on the books. And the Sun-Times and others, the state police have even reported only 30,000 gun owners or so in Illinois have actually registered their weapons, complied with the law. And Darren Bailey, your old pal, running for Congress here in Southern Illinois, is openly flaunting the law, saying he won't comply with it, won't follow the law. What are you going to do about that?
Remember, the very first and most important thing that happened as a result of our passing the assault weapons ban is you can't purchase an assault weapon in Illinois. You can't purchase a high-capacity magazine in the state of Illinois. That is the law. That is the fact on the ground today. Now, with regard to the registry, the rules, as you know, just got approved by JCAR, the committee in the legislature, yesterday. It took a while to get going. It's now in place. I think that that's going to clarify for people. There are not maybe an awful lot of people who didn't register because they weren't 100% sure that they needed to. Now it's settled. So one last thing I want to point out is that the gun, assault weapon advocates want to distract everybody talking about the registry. And the reality is that it's not 2.4 million people that have assault weapons.
Sure, but a good chunk of them.
It's not nearly 2.4 million people. In fact, you even saw among the people who registered that many of them have multiple assault weapons. And so when you say there are lots of assault weapons, and people do say that, they're in the hands of a fewer number of people than you think. Reality, very expensive to purchase an assault weapon as compared to some other kind of weapon. And so when those folks can afford perhaps to have multiple of those types of weapons. We're now, because the rules are in place, going to see many of those people actually stepping up and doing what they're supposed to do. Somebody running for Congress and saying they're not going to comply is just literally playing a political game.
Perhaps, but you often talk about the importance of modeling good behavior, leaders setting an example.
That's true.
It seems he's begging you to set an example, make an example of him.
Well, the example that is being set today is that we as a state are one of only 10 states that have banned assault weapons in this nation. We need a national assault weapons ban. But Illinois has been a leader on this subject. We worked hard to get this done. The NRA, the ISRA, all the other pro-gun groups fought for so many years and succeeded in making sure that we didn't have any kind of ban. Today, we're saving lives because of the work that we've done.
But the question is, should anyone who refuses to register the gun they do have against the law face prosecution for a misdemeanor or a repeat offense as a Class 4 felony?
Those folks are, in fact, subject to a misdemeanor.
On the first offense.
On the first offense, exactly, and then a felony, right? And that's almost like a warning system. And I think that's exactly the way it should be, because this is a new thing that's happened in Illinois. I think there are certainly people who are unsure about what they need to do and whether there are, in fact, consequences. So, fine. We've created a situation where what we're trying to do is limit the number of assault weapons that are out there. We haven't taken guns away from people. We're not demanding that people turn in their guns. We're just saying that we'd like people to register their guns. Why? Because we want to make sure that when someone shows up with a gun in the state of Illinois, let's say a year from now, they didn't purchase it out of state and bring it in state. We want to make sure that all the weapons that are subject to that law are known to the state so that we won't be adding to the stockpile of these very dangerous weapons in the state.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
What do the results in Iowa mean for the future and the new developments in the fight for abortion access in Missouri? Our political analyst Anita Mannion weighs in next. What did the results in the Iowa caucuses tell us about the direction of the Republican Party in 2024? Donald Trump sold it as strong momentum for his candidacy. Illinois Democratic Governor J.B. Pritzker, who campaigned for Joe Biden in Iowa that night, saw the results differently.
Well, I think you may have seen that he only got about half the votes of this is the base of the Republican Party that shows up at a caucus, especially when it's minus 25 with wind chill out, right? These are truly dedicated people. Again, the base of the party, he got half the vote. So half the vote went with somebody else. Now we'll see what happens in the contests going forward, and whether all the candidates are still in it over 4, 5, 6 different contests. But I will say I think it connotes weakness.
There you have it, connotes weakness. She has her PhD in political science. Our political analyst Anita Mannion joins us on the record. Good to have you with us.
Great to be here.
Most incumbent presidents that go to Iowa do get a lot more than 50%. Sometimes they don't even really have a caucus. It's just almost given if they're incumbent. Donald Trump is 4 years removed from that incumbent status. So how do you evaluate the strength or weakness of his candidacy going into New Hampshire?
Right, that's the situation Donald Trump was in 2020 when he was basically unopposed. But this time he is running with challengers, so it's a little different. He gets the incumbency advantage, but he has opposition. So Pritzker's right, he just got over 50%, but more than everyone else combined.
Yeah, if you look at the numbers, in 2016 when Trump was new, 187,000 GOP voters turned out in Iowa. This time around, just 110,000. Turnout was low. 15% of registered Republicans showed up in Iowa. It was cold, but I wonder what else you read into that number itself, that fewer people are just participating.
Yeah, I think overall we're seeing a lack of enthusiasm for a Biden-Trump rematch. And I think perhaps a lot of folks with the cold weather and thinking Trump largely has us on lockdown, if you've been looking at the polls, maybe it wasn't worth coming out whether you supported him or one of the other candidates.
As politics becomes more polarized, I'll give you one quick anecdote. At the Keokuk caucus site we were at in southeast Iowa, a speaker would come forward and advocate for each candidate. When it came time for someone to step forward, a little old lady who was supporting Ron DeSantis, she did so and said, well, Trump has 91 criminal charges and we should pick someone who doesn't have baggage, something DeSantis has said along the campaign trail many times. Some in the crowd started to shout her down and say, be quiet, sit down, we don't want to hear your lies. By the time a Nikki Haley supporter got up there, he was almost timid and sheepish to tell his story and almost had to apologize for stepping to the mic. It seemed that anybody who didn't fit in with the main Trump message wasn't welcome. Makes you wonder how many people are even willing to put themselves in that room, in that environment.
Caucuses are very different from a primary election, and the fact that it is a more public exchange. And so that does lead to lower turnout just in general, and then particularly in the Trump era where we see even the candidates, DeSantis and Haley, hesitant to challenge Trump himself. So it makes sense that the supporters would also be hesitant.
One of the other things that stood out to me, I'd never covered a caucus in person before. Being there in the room, there were a lot of people who saw the results on their phone around 7:30 before they had a ballot in hand. That's confusing to some people who haven't been in a caucus before, but fair or not fair for Ron DeSantis to call that election interference?
Well, folks who don't perform as well as they want find lots of reasons to blame it on. But I think there's a lot of people complaining about this, but in 2020, they called it very quickly as well. And CNN, I think, actually called it 1 minute earlier than the AP this year. Their argument is in a regular election that when the polls close, that's when they can start reporting. And in this election, in caucuses, they consider it when the doors close. That's like the polls closing. Everyone who's going to vote is in there. And so they consider it that. But another point is the parties themselves could wait to report out those results until all the caucuses voting is finished. And the Republican Party didn't. They sent those results in. So that's also partly their decision.
And some of the media also based it on entrance polling. So people walking in, they started taking sort of a poll and taking a read, and they factor that into some of their calculus. It gets kind of wonky. But you mentioned the making excuses for bad results. Ron DeSantis is also now having a reckoning with his own early campaign strategy. He's not apologizing, he's recalibrating and saying, man, I wish I would have gone after more media interviews with what he called corporate media, but I think it's media at large who he might face tougher questions there. Then he sort of went toward the conservative media there. How do you read that, shift of ideas or opinions, strategy from him this late in the game?
Yeah, I think that he's probably right that more exposure could have been good for him if you only choose the conservative outlets. Well, where Nikki Haley is going after those moderate voters, the independent voters, more college-educated voters that might not be tuning into those outlets, he might not have got the opportunity to appeal to those.
And she's polling well in New Hampshire. She's from South Carolina. What's your forecast of the next couple stops here?
Well, she really needs to perform well in New Hampshire. A win for her really bolsters her argument that this is a two-person race. She's really tried to pivot to that argument. If she polls a close second in New Hampshire. She comes in, that's pretty good. But South Carolina, even though she's from there, it's a much more conservative state. So I think expectations are lower for her there than they are in New Hampshire.
It'll be interesting to see. And I don't know how, there's all these different uncertainties that surround and swirl around Donald Trump. The Supreme Court has to still decide if he qualifies on the ballot. We're seeing Republican secretaries of state all over trying to say, don't give us this kind of power. Jay Ashcroft was weighing in there. Say the Supreme Court, in this hypothetical scenario, one day disqualifies Trump, who's better positioned to receive his share of voters, Ron DeSantis or Nikki Haley?
I think that Ron DeSantis would consider himself the heir apparent there. If we look at kind of how the demographic votes broke down in Iowa, he did get sort of more of the Trump voters. We look at the Republican base nowadays, it is less college educated, more conservative, and that tends to be the DeSantis. His argument all along has sort of been, I'm a younger Trump without the baggage. And so I think that he would like to think he could capitalize on that.
All right, and then very quickly, any reaction to the new developments this week in Missouri where an abortion question is now coming forward and pro-choice advocates are rallying around this?
We've been talking about this for a while, Mark, and one of the things is they had not chosen the ballot language and we hadn't seen a coalition form. So now those two things have happened and they have an opportunity to move forward.
More on that to come. If you live in Illinois and own an assault weapon, the law says you had to register that weapon with the state, but how many people actually did? We dig into those numbers next. Missouri Governor Mike Parson faces a key decision that could soon shape the future of abortion in the state. If abortion advocates raise enough signatures to put a question on the ballot, he's the one who chooses whether to place that question on the primary ballot in August or the general election ballot in November. We asked him about that timing and his preference on Thursday.
We'll see what all happens. Right now you're in the beginning initial phases of them just filing for it. You're a long way from recruiting the money to be able to get this stuff done. So we'll see. It's early on. We'll see, and then we'll decide where we're going to put that on the ballot if we have that opportunity.
And a Republican pro-choice advocate circulating a different petition that would allow abortion up to 12 weeks or in cases of rape or incest. The Missouri Women and Family Research Fund says they're already collecting signatures on that. Confusion clouded the early rollout of the Illinois Assault Weapon Registry. Now, new rules are in place clarifying how gun owners in Illinois can register those assault weapons on the banned list. The powerful J-Car panel authorized those new rules proposed by Illinois State Police just this week. This coming as many gun owners say they will refuse to register their weapons. State Senator Bill Cunningham chairs J-Car.
I would just repeat what I said earlier, which is the law is in place, and I would encourage people to follow the law.
People who own weapons banned under the Protect Illinois Communities Act had until January 1st to register. The ISP says fewer than 30,000 people have done so far. When we come back, we correct the record on some crime stats you heard on this show last week. Before we go, we have to correct the record on an errant statistic we told you about on this program last week. You might have heard me ask Office of Violence Prevention Director Will Pinckney about this statistic. The mayor's State of Public Safety report claimed only 0.16% of our population are likely responsible for 30% of the region's murders. It turns out the number of people likely responsible for local murders is 10 times smaller. Here's what happened. I saw that statistic in an official public document. Here it is. I checked its citation. It was from a recent regional crime summit where academic researchers did say something similar. I was there. I didn't have the exact quote myself, but I remembered them saying something similar. But a little basic math would have gone a long way, it turns out. The statistic might sound shocking at face value, such a small fraction of people responsible for such a big, violent problem. But extrapolate that out. What is 0.16% of the city's population? That's about 470 people. And they were responsible for 30% of murders? We should have been a bit more skeptical. That would have meant 470 people were somehow responsible for 30% or about 47 murders. Surely the city wasn't claiming 10 suspects or accomplices were each responsible for each murder. The more likely explanation, someone at City Hall just missed the statistic by 1 decimal point. It should have been about 0.016% of the population responsible for 30% of the area murders. That'd be about 47 people responsible for 47 murders. All right, why run through all this? Well, for 3 reasons. 1, to be transparent about our own mistakes and own up to them. When we cite a statistic on this program, we want you to know you can trust it. 2, to demonstrate how politicians can spin stats to sound more meaningful than they really are. And 3, well, because my accountant always said there was probably a reason I ended up in a career dealing in words and not numbers. That does it for us this week. Thanks for joining us. Have a good night and a great week. And until the next time, we're off the record.